City of Stevens Point Plan Commission meeting, recorded February 4, 2019.
I have 6 o'clock. We will call the regular City Plan Commission meeting to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Weeza.
Here.
Kneebone.
Here.
Arnson.
Here.
Cooper.
Here.
Haynes.
Here.
Hoppy.
Here.
Rice.
Here.
All present. We will move on. Item number 2. First action item on the agenda is on page 4, and that is the report of the January 7th meeting. Commissioner Cooper?
Move approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Haynes. Discussion there? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 3 is a presentation by Ellers Incorporated on tax incremental financing. So we have Dawn here, who is going to be giving us a little bit of a presentation. We did have a couple of PowerPoint handouts, but other than that,
There's some on the back table.
if there's not, we can follow along on the screen. We have, looks like 5 seats available. If there are 49 seats in the room. If there is not a seat for you, there's an overflow room just down the hall, next door on the left. It has one-way audio and video, and we can fit another 49 in there. So we have 1 chair per person that we're allowed by fire code. If there is not a chair for you, even if you're standing in the back, you count. So if it's more than 49, we need you to move into the overflow room. All right? Director, do you want to introduce Dawn?
Yeah, Don Gunnarsson with Ellers. Ellers has been our advisor for TIF, or tax incremental financing, as the city has looked at districts in the past and potentially in the future. I felt it was appropriate to bring Dawn here to provide just an overview of what TIF is and kind of how it works. While the Plan Commission doesn't often play a big role in terms of any financial incentives and going through that part, they do play a key role in developing the project plan and the start of the districts and the improvements that go into it. So as we look at moving forward with the creation of TIF 10, I thought it would be good to have Dawn provide a good introduction to TIF, especially for some of the new members on the Plan Commission. So Dawn Gunnarsson with Ellers.
Thank you, Michael. We've got a PowerPoint presentation on the screen, and I think there's extra copies, and I think each member of the Plan Commission has been provided with one. So, yes, the goal here today, try to lean into it. The goal here today is to give you basic update and some information on tax increment financing here in the state of Wisconsin, how it works, why it might be used, some of the due diligence efforts that communities can go through to ensure that it's used properly. So, tax increment financing, it's really the most powerful economic development tool we have here in the state of Wisconsin, and generally the only economic development tool that's really available to us to use to incentivize development from happening. And what it does, it allows that the tax increment revenue collected on a certain area of property can be used to put back in to benefit that area. And many times you'll hear about the word TIF or TID. They're used interchangeably. TIF is tax increment financing, and that's the economic development tool that's used. The law is the TIF law here in Wisconsin. The TID is the TID district, or the area in which the TIF tool is being used to finance projects. So we'll talk a little bit about and graphically show you how it's used and how those districts are created and the dollars are incorporated. So since 1976, it was put in place then. It's been used many, many, many times, and I'll give you some examples and statistics on that. But again, it was intended to promote economic development, and the law has gone through many, many iterations over the course of time. There's one of the misnomers that it's only for blight elimination. Well, when it was first created, there was some truth to that, but there was a lot of industrial development that took place when the laws were created back in the mid to late 70s, and a lot of districts were created, industrial parks were created as part of that TIF law then. But it has gone through many changes over time. The laws have been amended, maybe a little bit more liberal, but it's been of benefit to local governments. So again, it's intended to promote economic development. It's to provide resources or a lack of incentives that might be available to make a project happen. It allows for public-private cooperation and participation in a project to make something happen or redevelop. And, it was originally established back in the 70s kind of to address an economic downturn. And I think we've seen a lot of revitalization with TIF during the recession that we had in more recent years. But one of the key things, and when you see where the dollars are generated, if you were looking at municipalities alone burdening the cost of providing incentives to develop within their communities, what TIF has done is it provides the resources from all the other taxing entities. So there's somewhat of a sharing in the cost of promoting development. So as far as its utilization, since 1976, there's been over 2,000 districts that have been created within the state of Wisconsin. About 869 of those have dissolved. Some have reached their statutory limit. Others have been closed early because they've satisfied the intent of what they were created, and they've recovered any project costs that they've incurred. We presently have over 1,200 active TIFs here in the state of Wisconsin, and of the 593 villages and cities, there's over 420 that actually have utilized the tool for economic development purposes within their communities. So the next slide is kind of a graphic of how it works. And I'll try to walk you through that without having the benefit of a pointer. But if you look at the top right-hand corner, the first thing that's done is you identify a geographic area that maybe you want to focus on. I know here in Stevens Point, there have been efforts towards redevelopment in your downtown. There's some TIF areas there. Some farther out that have been utilized for industrial development and other mixed-use commercial development. So the first thing is identifying an area, a geographic area. And to create a district, a TIF district, you need to have full, complete parcels, and those parcels need to be contiguous. So if you look at the far right of this corner, and you figure that red area is your tax increment district. They're all full parcels. You can't split a parcel in half, but you can cross a road, you can cross a river, you can cross a railroad track. They kind of ignore those. So if they're contiguous, that if that road wasn't there, the properties would touch, they're considered contiguous. Or if they meet on corners, that they'd actually touch somehow, the parcels would touch, they're considered contiguous. So the first thing is identifying that district area that you maybe want to focus your redevelopment efforts on. And the first step then is, once those parcels in that area has been identified, an analysis of the value of all that property as it stands today, or the date you're creating the district. And that always goes back to the January 1, because values are certified of 1/1 every year. So depending on the timing, it could be 1/1 of 19, or it could be 1/1 of 20, depending on the district creation. But that value is added up of all the properties, and that's land value and improvement value. And actually personal property gets counted into that as well. And it's called the base value. So that base value is frozen. And the way the tax collection revenue comes in on the district, so we've got in the chart on the left that base value in blue. All property, whether you're in a tax increment district or not, it doesn't matter. There's no cut or a reduction in your taxes because you're in a district. Everybody pays the same tax rate per value of property. So on our illustration there, I've got a little pie chart on the bottom right-hand corner. And when you're collecting property taxes, you're paying city taxes, county taxes, technical college taxes, and school district taxes. So there's a pie, and the taxes collected on any property within Stevens Point get distributed within that pie. If you're in a tax increment district, the value of that property when it's created, that base value, all the taxes on that base value still gets distributed in the same pie. So nobody loses value because the property's been put in a district. They'll continue to collect taxes on that base value. What the premise of TIF is if you put investments into that area, whether it's new roads that need to go in, remediation for some environmental issues that need to be cleaned up, the dollars that are invested in that area will generate new property tax value. So if you're incentivizing a business or putting roads into place to make a business actually develop in that site, that new value of that newly created business or that newly created property is called increment. And in our chart on the upper left-hand side, you'll see that in the green, that's the assumptions of the value in this illustration of improvements. So it starts out at the base value, dollars are spent, and then that value increases. It's that increase or incremental value that now the tax is collected will come to the city to pay off any dollars that they've spent to incentivize that. So on the bottom left, the pie now is all of the dollars come to the city on that improvement value. And therefore, you're not just using the city's tax rate, but you're benefiting from the county's tax rate, the school district tax rate, and the technical college tax rate. So those entities agree to the creation of the district and understand that while that district is in place, they're foregoing the value on that property. And we'll talk a little bit about the premise of TIF and the but-for, and kind of help you understand why they would be interested in even doing this. So the distribution of the taxes changes on that incremental value. The base value still gets distributed as always, so those taxing entities aren't giving anything up on that. It's the incremental and the shift of the dollars and the taxes collected there. So moving on, as I mentioned, the premise of TIF has changed over time. The types of districts that can be created are much more numerous than they were initially, but there's basically 4 types of tax increment districts and 4 utilizations for tax revenue dollars. One of those is for industrial development. So you can create an industrial district. At least half of the area, geographical area by acreage, has to be zoned for and suitable for industrial development. And it needs to stay that. Zoning must stay in place for the life of the district. So the dollars spent are to promote industry or industrial development. Mixed use is and this is newer in the law, this wasn't part of the law initially, but mixed use is suitable for a combination of purposes. So they're industrial, residential, and commercial. So to create a mixed-use district, you have to have 2 of those 3, and again, 50% of your area has to be suitable for that type of development. There is a limitation. I mean, TIF was never intended to build single-family homes out in open space. I mean, it was never intended to help subsidize that. So they've put limitations on the residential support for tax increment district in kind of a newly platted area. And it can't encompass more than 35% of the boundary district by acreage. And once that is limited to that 35%, there's other restrictions on the type of residential development that can take place. It can be a density of at least 3 units an acre, so small lots, multifamily, duplexes, condominiumized, those types of things would work. They'd fit that density. A conservation subdivision, which is defined by law, small lots with a lot of open space, or a traditional neighborhood development. And that's the type of thing you'd see maybe in a downtown area where you may have commercial on the bottom of a building and residential above that. That would be a walkable area for traditional development. Those are the types of things that they allow residential support for. Then we have a rehabilitation or conservation. Those are in a blight designation. Those two are, there's some distinctions, but they're quite similar in nature. And 50% of the area needs to meet the statutory findings. In these type of districts, you can spend it on if it's downtown, you can spend it on residential in downtown to rehab property or to eliminate blight. So if you've got some deteriorating buildings, it could fall into either one of those. If you have some contamination, that typically would fall into a blight district. So those are the 4 types of districts that can be created presently under the state law. Now, I know that there's been some discussion here recently of the potential to create a new district. You've got some other districts that have gone through this process in the past, but there's a procedure that is required to take place. So this is where the Plan Commission gets involved in the process. The project plan that is initially developed for a district comes out of this body initially as a project plan by the Plan Commission. But there's a process of steps that need to go through before it can be created as a tax increment district. And that approval process starts with the convening of all those overlapping taxing entities. So you invite the county, the city that has a representative, the technical college, the school district, and then there's one public member. And that body needs to convene because they need to understand what's going on, because they have to be willing to forego the taxes on any new development in this area, and are involved in the decision-making process to create the district. So you convene that body initially, and they have to convene prior to any further action. So then the next step is there's a public hearing that's held, and that's typically held by the Plan Commission. It can be held by a community development authority. That's a decision that each local government can make. So the community development authority, if one exists, can step in and act on the behalf of the Plan Commission. But that public hearing takes place, and that body would consider a resolution recommending the boundaries and the project plan and the project plan would include the cost, the location of the district, the expectation of value that would be coming out as a result of any cost going in. And then the Plan Commission would make a recommendation that be approved. That would go on to the Common Council. The Common Council then considers the creation of the district and the plan and adopts a resolution if it moves forward with that. That's the official date. So the clock, every district has a different timeline, and we're not going to get into all those details, but it starts the clock. And so by statute, the clock starts then. You can start incurring project cost, and then so many years after that, then it would automatically close when the clock reaches that point in time, or the calendar reaches that point in time. But there is still one final step, so we never advise that anybody go out and spend a whole bunch of money until you get this last step, because if you don't have a majority of that overlapping taxing entities voting to approve it, the district can't go forward. So there's a 5-member board, and they would need 3 members of that board to approve the district for the district to become officially adopted. And then there's a process after that, goes through the state of Wisconsin. They have to certify a base value and certify that the district is created. And interestingly enough, I saw in a bunch of emails today, the state is approving any district that was created last year before September 30th. They're going into that process now and certifying those base values. So that happens early in the year. So again, each one of these steps has a variety of material that gets prepared, a variety of notices that have to be produced and put in place, and then particular action for each of those steps. So as I mentioned, why would an overlapping taxing entity, or why would you want to commit dollars into something for the purposes of this? The underlining program itself has what is referred to as the but-for test. So but for the use of tax increment financing or dollars towards this development might not happen. It might not happen as it's being proposed or within the timeline that's desirable by the community. It might be a preservation of jobs or creation of new jobs. There's a lot of different things that would maybe not happen if dollars weren't provided to this district or to this project or program. So the reason that the overlapping taxing entities and the community would probably be willing to support that is if you don't do anything, you're not going to gain anything. So the county is not losing any value because it wouldn't happen without the use of the dollars. So they're willing to forego the time period to recover that and get the benefit on the back end. So as long as that but-for analysis and test is truly undertaken, then you can feel fairly comfortable that you've done the right thing. A really simple example is if you've got an area that has no public utilities, and you can't develop it without roads or water or sewer, but for putting that infrastructure in place, you're not going to get any development. That's a pretty easy test to do that. It can get a little more complicated when you're looking at development incentives and other types of things. So you ask, why would you want to provide insistence? There's a lot of different reasons to look at this. If you've got rehabilitation or you've got blight you need to remove or eliminate, those would be reasonable dollars to put into a project to make something happen. You encourage higher quality of development. If you put some incentive in, you're going to get a better quality, which generates better tax base and promotes other opportunities. If you've got jobs that you want to enhance property values or stay competitive in the market. I mean, it's not uncommon anymore that businesses will look at one community or another community, and if you're going to be competitive, a lot of times you have to provide some incentive to make that happen. Or if it's a creation of job opportunities within the community. So if In many cases, developers are looking for some assistance in projects to make them happen. You have to realize that a developer is not out there to do business to not make money. I mean, there's an expectation that there's a return on any investment that they put in. To raise capital, to make development happen, they have to have investors that are willing to put their money and risk their money into a project with an expectation that there's a return. We're seeing more now in terms of that investor return, that there's a need to put some incentive perhaps up front to make that happen, and so that the dollars can be put together to make a project go into place. But if you do that but for, and you analyze the numbers and determine that there's a gap to make something happen, then you've done some due diligence to do that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that due diligence, but it's important to go through that exercise and validate that there is truly a need or a gap financing, if it's beyond the basic infrastructure type of cost. So some of the efforts that as elected officials or members of this body can go through if you're faced with evaluating projects is, you have to decide, is this a good project for your community? Is this something that fits within your land use plans or your zoning plans or the things that you have envisioned as your goals for the community? Does the project truly fit? Is it meeting your needs as your local needs and the objectives you have within your government and your community? Have you considered alternatives to the site? I mean, those are different things you can go to. And also, is there support for the project? Is there support from the government? Is there support from the community to make something happen? A lot of times, if it's redevelopment efforts in your downtown, you want to see improvements there because it spurs a lot of other good things to be happening within your community. And is your risk tolerance for any request? Is it within line? Is it reasonable for if you are looking at exposure? And we'll talk a little bit about how you can finance different projects. And there's different ways of putting your dollars in. They can be put up front. If you go out and borrow money to put roads in, you're up front putting your dollars into TIF. You talk about that exposure and that risk to that. You could have it being developer finance that you provided over time. You could also provide your incentive dollars in a lump sum, but you could do that at the back end when the development is done before you provide any incentive into a project. And those have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes they work well, sometimes there's a combination, or they have to be evaluated. So, as far as making decision, you want to know what you're going to get at the end. How much dollars is the investor putting into this project? What sort of value is going to be generated at the back end? Is it worth your dollars to contribute to get that extra value at the back end? We a lot of times recommend if you do have someone that's approached you and they're looking for just we say we need X amount of money to make this project happen. We suggest that you have an independent review of the pro forma of that project. A developer typically will have gone through an analysis. They know how much money, or they should know how much money, their costs going into it, and the money they have available, and their returns. They should have done that pro forma. You can have that reviewed independently to ensure that that return that they're expecting is not too rich and it's a reasonable return. And then we also recommend that there's a look back to validate it after construction cost, and again at a point in time. So those are some of the due diligence that you can put into place. As far as the types of financing, I mentioned there's upfront financing. You borrow money, put it into the project, and then you wait for the increment to come back to make the principal and interest payments, or advance the funds and you rely on that increment to pay you back. Or there's developer funded, which in the upfront, you take on that risk. So you've got the investment in place, you're waiting for that value to come in, the risk is borne by the community. If a developer funds it at a pay-go, we suggest if you can do this, it shifts that risk to the developer. It also provides encouragement to the developer. They're not going to get their money back if they don't perform. So it incentivizes them to get the project moving, to get the dollars happening. Again, this isn't always available or an option. Then the taxes that are collected get paid back to the developer. They get their money over time. Many times the promise to pay is put into place, and the developer will get monetize that promise to pay from a bank, and that'll help them put the dollars in front. So those are the different types of things that you can look at in terms of financing projects. Again, case by case, every deal is different. If you do provide any incentive or any dollars into a project, a developer's agreement must be entered into. That's a statutory requirement. There's different ways to mitigate any risk that you have, and on slide 12, there's a few things that can be considered in doing that. They can be combinations of these, and again, it can be combinations of how the project is financed as well. So one of them is you require a minimum tax value for the life of the district, that the developer says, we need this much money, we're going to build this. We'll make them promise that that value will be there for the life of the district. You can have a make-whole provision where if you've issued debt and that increment isn't enough to make your payments, that they make you whole on that, so they make up any shortfall. That can be put into a developer's agreement. You can have what we call a springing special assessment. So if you're putting roads and sewer in and you're putting that up front, you can, if the increment isn't available to make those payments, you can put a special assessment on the project. That becomes a lien on their property, even ahead of their mortgage. It has to be paid off before property can sell. So that can be a pretty sure guarantee, but it has to be an accessible project. So water, sewer, streets, those types of things. Personal guarantees from developers, they a little harder to enforce, because you might be in the courts going after that at the end of the day, but sometimes it can make a developer feel like they've put in their own dollars or their own risk is being committed. An irrevocable letter of credit from a third-party bank, harder to get these days because that's a cost to the developer and it just adds to their project cost, but that certainly is a real strong assurance that you're protected. And if there's a way to put a mortgage against the property, again, you're usually, if they're borrowing money, you would be a second mortgage on this, so not necessarily a first recovery, but it is a combination of these things are always certainly things to consider. So I also want to touch a little bit about once you've created a district, not go into a whole lot of detail here, but you can amend the boundaries of that district. So if you've decided on an area and you find out 5 years from now that it'd be beneficial to bring in more area, you can change the boundaries. That's additions or subtractions up to 4 times during the life of the district. You can amend the projects without changing the boundaries an unlimited number of times. So if you get it 3 years out and there's something that's come forward that you hadn't contemplated, you could amend the district to incorporate that, and you can do that an unlimited number of times during the life of the district. You really have up to 5 years before it closes by statute to spend money to take on new projects. And you can also do a revenue allocation, and you've done this here in Stevens Point. There's requirements on which districts can receive donor dollars, but you can amend one successful district to help share revenue with one that maybe isn't quite as successful. So those are allowed to do revenue sharing allocations between districts. And again, kind of to wrap a little bit up here is this chart just shows since 1998 how many by year different types of either creation districts or amendments, whether they're territory, project plan. There was a period of time where you could distress a district. So that's just kind of graphically to show you, again, that it's a lot of activity that takes place within this program, and the utilization is quite strong here in the state. So I'm not, every district that you create has its own life by law. The blight rehab districts can be open longer. Usually there takes longer to recover cost in those types of investments, but each one of them has a different statutory life. So when the district can remain open till that statutory life, there are some provisions to extend those under certain circumstances. You would also, if you've undertaken all your projects that you planned and you've recovered all the cost, you by law have to close the district, or at any time you can choose by resolution to close a district. However, if you've got any unrecovered project cost, by closing it early, you're absorbing those costs at your level. But if you do choose to close it at the time it closes, if there's any residual money left over, that gets reallocated back to all the taxing entities as a lump sum payment at the end of the day. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of brief background. I don't know if there's time for questions or.
If the commissioners had any questions for Dawn, we could take those.
I know you got a big agenda.
We do. We do.
I just have one. You were talking about all the procedures that you have to go to. What's the average length of time that takes a municipality?
We typically try to do it with normal meeting dates, so, 60 to 90 days for a creation, a little longer than 90, I mean, to get all the due diligence put together is pretty standard. Amendments can go a little quicker.
Okay. We're good? Thank you very much, Dawn.
Welcome.
For those of you watching and listening at home, we are going to have tax increment financing part 2 at our finance committee meeting to talk a little bit more about how TIF and TIDs affect us locally here in Stevens Point. And we'll have our comptroller treasurer do a presentation at next week's finance committee. So thank you again. We will have the PowerPoint presentation up available on our website so you can get it digitally if you are watching or listening at home. And that should be up within a couple of days. Thanks again. All right, item number 4 is on page 18 of your packet, and that is a request from Blanker Construction for a site plan review to construct a building at an unaddressed property between Windy Drive and Highway 10 East with parcel numbers identified. Director.
All right, thank you, Mayor. The reason why this is before you is because it's within the B5 Highway Commercial Zoning District. Any development that takes place within that district does need a site plan review through the Plan Commission and Common Council, really to review the impact that it has on traffic and Highway 10, so we don't increase that problem out on Highway 10. We can avoid that in the future. But with this development, the proposal is to create about 11,000 square foot commercial building with multiple tenants. It's on a vacant piece of property in the Parkdale subdivision bordering Highway 10. Again, the zoning of the district is B5, and the reason for this request, the ingress egress points, as you can see, they don't allow ingress egress right on Highway 10 here with the state highway, so all ingress egress will be via a secondary street with Windy Drive. And then adjacent to these developments, we've typically required connections in between the parking lots so they don't have to go back out onto the street to patronize the other businesses. So this is just a quick review of the site plan. To the north is on the upside. You can see with the western connection back to the other strip mall, you would take access and then also an additional access off of Windy Drive. At this point, they're showing one access point off of Windy Drive, which would be appropriate to meet the current zoning requirements for that district. 5-tenant building. They do have an anchor tenant that they're looking at with the Highway 10 frontage. And then this is just a little bit zoomed in approach with north being to the left here. Just a quick view of the renderings of the building. El Mezcal would be the anchor tenant along Highway 10. So with that, we would recommend approval as submitted with the conditions that were outlined within the staff report, which are also outlined on the screen.
Questions from the commissioners?
I was just wondering, on the number 5, the sidewalks shall be installed? There
So-
aren't any sidewalks
There-
anywhere else.
There are on Covantage. So as you see on this image on the screen,
Oh,
to
okay.
the east,
Way
they did
down
start
there.
making the connection, and this development would also require to be having sidewalks as well.
Well, can there be, I don't know, somehow have the 2 older developments have sidewalks? It just seems kind
There
of
can
strange.
be, they could do a special assessment on those to install sidewalks, yes.
What does
Still,
that
where
say?
would they go?
The council would approve. We actually have a sidewalk continuation plan in place. We could implement adding those 2 properties in just to make the sidewalks contiguous. But we wouldn't be able to do that here tonight. We're only talking about the site plan.
Well, I know, I'm
For the
just
parcel
asking,
identified.
because
I
it just
understand.
seems funny to
It
have
certainly
this-
does, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Even more funny in residential areas
yeah.
where one block has it, or
One
half a
doesn't.
block has it, or one property on the block has it. I don't know where some of this stuff came from.
Me neither.
It's your job to fix it now.
That's why I asked.
All right, any other questions from commissioners?
I just have a comment. There's so much empty space out there. They'll be leaving the old El Mezcal open. There's 4,000 square feet available in the building right next to where they want to construct. There's the old Cops, there's half of the old Walmart, and now we've got empty storefronts and a strip mall for sale out there, and now we're adding another 11,000 square feet. Seems a little bit like urban sprawl for resident, or for retail, but there's absolutely no reason not to approve it, except that it just seems like, in my mind, we're adding more empty space to an area that's already full of empty space. But, I mean, I'm not gonna oppose it, but it just seems a little odd.
Okay.
So is the old Cops, is that part of a TIF district?
It is not.
It is not.
It is not.
It is no.
Not.
It is not.
Not,
No.
yeah, okay, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
No,
I was gonna
no,
say.
there is no TIF district out in this area.
Yeah.
Okay, comments from the audience? Hearing none, bring it back to the commissioners. What are your wishes?
Move approval of the request, subject to staff recommended conditions.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Rice. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 3, I'm sorry, Jesus. 5, it clearly says 5. Item number 5 is a public hearing and action on a request from Slingshot Architecture to rezone 1017 3rd Street from B2 Central Business Transition District to PD Plan Development District. Just a little ground rules here for the public hearing. We have 2 public hearings on this particular project. The first one is just going to be for the rezoning. The second one will be for the conditional use. During a public hearing, we will take testimony from anyone in the audience who wishes to speak. And when that's done, we will bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Okay, so try and keep your comments germane to the project item, the agenda item. So if you're going to speak about the rezoning, that is one item. If you're going to speak about the conditional use and those conditions, that's a second item on a separate public hearing. Try and make the distinction there, please. Director, do you want to talk about anything on the rezoning first?
So just quickly, then we'll turn it over to the applicant. With this, as the mayor had mentioned, there's multiple requests. One is the rezoning of the property to a planned development district. That district is usually used to allow for greater flexibility for a more complete development package and making sure that development fits together as opposed to taking each individual building or each individual development each individually at one time. So this allows for a greater flexibility to work with a developer, which may mean having certain deviations approved in order for the development to move forward, in turn for a better development to happen. So that's what we're looking for on the first one. As you can see in the packet, there really aren't a lot of deviations that are being requested, some very minor ones. As we then get to the item number 6, which is the conditional use permit and public hearing for that, that is there for multifamily, and multifamily only. Within our zoning districts, every single zoning district that allows multifamily is a conditional use for multifamily. So the recommendations and the conditions relating to that item should be germane to multifamily use, not the development as a whole, but really the multifamily use for that conditional use permit. So that's kind of what we'd be looking at. And then the following item is number 7 with the redevelopment authority, the authorization to dispose of the property to the developer. So they will all likely be talked about in kind of single context by the applicant and myself, but that's kind of the sequence of events, looking to rezone the property, and then ultimately the conditional use for multifamily.
Okay. Maybe we'll have the developer talk a little bit more about the project. I know we've heard from you a couple of times already, but I think it would be a good baseline to set the tone for everyone else.
All right, great. My name's Dan Drendel, and I'm one of 3 principals at Slingshot Architecture, and we're here to talk about the project tonight. I actually didn't get to make it last time, and the rest of my team was here, so I'm really excited to be here and tell you guys a little bit about the development of the project. Collectively, we're merge over development, working in communities that have qualified opportunity zones and basically downtown areas in need of redevelopment. Oh. Sorry. What am I looking to do here?
Nope, there you go.
It's fine. So am I just clicking?
Yep.
All right. So I mentioned opportunity zones. Communities throughout the Midwest have participated in this by census tract. Basically, what's been great for us, we've met great people here in Stevens Point, and basically one of the reasons that we came to town was that this program was here. This is our project team. Brent Dahlstrom's here. Joy was also here last time. Andrea didn't get to join us here today, but she's the project leader in my office. We're 18 people now in Des Moines and Iowa City, and I've been fortunate enough to work with this team. This is just a good point about kind of how we think about development. So we're really looking to make vibrant places, vibrant spaces in urban fabric. And so Jan Gela, someone that we take a lot of inspiration from, his practices in Copenhagen. He spent really number of decades, 5 or so decades, working within Copenhagen and other cities. But the point here is that, regardless of cultures and climates, people are the same in that they'll gather together in public if they have good places to do so. Something that we loved as we got to know your community a little bit is just the already rich urban infrastructure of green space, parks, a complete trail system for a community of your size is just really amazing and really beautiful. But we can add to that with some space for people to gather. So as we learned a little bit about Stevens Point, the actual point being where logs might come down the river as part of the logging industry. The brand that we put together around this development, calling it the North Side Yard, is really an idea about linking back to the North Side neighborhood that's relatively disconnected by Center Point Drive today. Very busy one-way street. We want to increase the connectivity to that neighborhood through this development. It's a great opportunity to do so. And then the logo that we developed around that kind of comes from the site conditions of how we developed it and the way that logs were marked with a hammer as they were going down the river. My firm, really our focus is this statement. We look to engage community so that people in place transform. The process that we put together on all of our projects, and specifically here on this project, is one to first investigate and meet people and talk about the community and talk about the needs of the community and then talk about the needs of the site. We found that there is a great demand for urban living downtown, really almost like an untapped condition down here. But lots of people working downtown, lots of things to do downtown, not a lot of people living downtown. And then we found a number of local retailers that were interested in having some different spaces that weren't necessarily available. And so really crafted this project around that condition to put a place together where, because of a retail destination or because of a group of retailers, that you could really gather around that and link up the neighborhoods. Just briefly, Slingshot Architecture, we do all different kinds of work. We do a lot of urban infill work like this. And in Des Moines, this is our city map. These are the projects that we've done inside of our city in the last decade. And what we've learned there is, so we were living in our fabric. Our office is downtown. It's in a storefront. We walk around the city. We talk about the benefit of having our boots on the ground and walking around the city and learning how it works and learning what works when you do new projects and things. And so we have a number of topics that we look to cover on every project. But in summary, it's really the space between buildings and the uses that you put on the ground floors that really make a vibrant city and a vibrant urban space. which a lot of architects won't tell you because they just want to do the buildings. Just quickly, I think in the last meeting there was a request to show a little bit more of our work in the Midwest as precedent. We've done all different scales, whatever's kind of needed by the urban fabric. This is a development on the river in Des Moines and some townhomes in kind of a transitioning industrial area. But you can see the skyline behind. All of the roof decks were oriented to be able to see the skyline. Another development, kind of similar scales, but it's right on our main riverfront in our downtown. And what we did with the development team was actually phase in a really rich, about $1 million park space, urban green space in the middle of these townhomes to really kick off the development and set the tone. This is in Cedar Falls. Another Cedar Falls project that Brent and I are working on right now. It's under construction. We threw this in because it has a similar condition to Centerpoint in that the road we were building on was very busy, but we were adding a pedestrian space in the streetscape. And so we took advantage of the wider right-of-way here and made the tree planters rain gardens and very protective of that urban pedestrian experience. Another project we're doing in Waterloo, that's actually, the previous one was one of the first opportunity zone projects in the country. And this one's down the street from it in a little bit more industrial condition. Like I said, we look to get to know the city in what you can walk to from the site that we're looking at. So the circles on that diagram happen to be 5 and 10 minute walks. So this site is very walkable to the downtown, but we talk about a 5 minute walk being where you might walk your dog around the neighborhood. A 10 minute walk would be more of a destination walk. So really, so much of downtown is walkable from this location. And we study the zoning and the implications of that. So from being here, we spent several days here. We talked to some people, some business leaders, the city staff, like I said, retailers, other people, and started looking at what the condition was that we could really take on in the city at this site. And so the two green circles there are the big point here in this diagram. That's the site. And there's this great pedestrian path in front of the hotel and then through the Main Street buildings to get you down to Main Street that lands kind of mid-block at this condition. And then there's a street from the north side neighborhood that really dead ends at this location. And so those two circles we really saw as landing points from different conditions in the city that we wanted to link together in a pedestrian space. And then we looked at, in accordance with really what your city planners have in mind and are working on in some of the other studies that are going on right now, about how Centerpoint could be changed. And so as part of this project, we want to add parallel parking in front of the retail and then add a really nice, rich streetscape with trees and planters and native plantings. And so you can see the street section up on top where the pedestrian walking against our new building here on the right would be very protected from what is now a very busy street, but over time can become a more pedestrian-oriented space. And then the concept, so we were really taken with these images that we found of these logs, like large-scale logs, particularly the image on the left, and how the ends can be these really dynamic pieces. And we wanted to have, as you drove up and down Centerpoint, or as you walked or biked near that area, that you would see this energy of this courtyard space that links the two conditions in the neighborhood. And then also that Third and Union could also become reinforce this pedestrian space by putting front doors, residential front doors on the street. So this is the overall plan. Green spaces in between the buildings, and what we're highlighting here is something that we hadn't fully explained in our previous submission, but that the green spaces and even the parking lots, we've used a lot of different strategies in the past, but rain gardens and permeable pavers to treat water quality on the site. So The green is where we'll take site water in and let it percolate through green spaces, and the yellow is permeable pavers on the site. And we keep those out of the drive aisles because they're not so good for plowing and whatnot. So pavers are good for under cars and not in the drive aisle. And then we even looked at how we could how residents on the site could circulate even around the buildings. So a lot of sites of this size, it's about 4 acres. Really, you can like walk your dog. Your neighborhood is kind of like on the site, which is a great scale. And then the other thing is kind of the shaded areas are your views out of this courtyard gathering area. And the idea is that you're not going to see cars in the pedestrian spaces in the public realm, that it's really devoted to that pedestrian experience. So the images are a little bit different than last time, but I just, in that we've had a little bit of time where we've developed them a little bit further. My team's very excited in the office, as am I. But you can see kind of how the idea of the ends of the buildings moving and sticking out in different depths really locate this special space in the middle of the block. But then you can also see some development of the streetscape and the plantings there. And then from a pedestrian view, parallel parking, hopefully future bike lane. And then the retail space in the courtyard, a mix of partnerships with local retailers, and then opportunities for micro retail to start up as well. Micro retail being a small space under 1,000 square feet where we provide all the infrastructure as far as bathrooms and mechanical outside of the space and already installed, so that really they can start up very easily in a simple box. So this is a new image from last time, the corner of Center Point and 3rd. And so under the ends of the buildings, a lot of glass and a little bit of black metal working with the black storefront. And then the stone panels underneath kind of the long ends of the logs, right? But what was fun about how this developed then is that the articulation of the end of the building and the side of the building and then the ends in the courtyards give this urban rhythm that really breaks down these buildings. So even though it's a relatively larger scale building, it's really broken down into about 5 facades as we go down Center Point. And then a different scale as we go down 3rd, walk-up units at the ground plane with some green space in front of them, and then apartment units on top. And again at 3rd. And what's fun about here, so this is the connection into that north side neighborhood at the mid-block. And so we've got townhomes on the backside that relate to the 1.5 story houses that are on that street currently. And so more front doors will be added to the street, this pedestrian path through to that courtyard. And then, the articulation of the actual houses that are on that street today, they're varied forms, they're varied heights, they're not all the same, they don't just repeat. And so we didn't want the townhomes to do that either. So there's a mix of 2-story townhomes, and then this 3rd story one that you see in the middle is one where you can walk out of a special room onto a roof deck in that unit. So it gives us some variety there. And then the other thing that's really special about these kind of views from the neighborhood is this street is at scale with the neighborhood, but you can see them beyond the courtyard buildings that are just beyond, so you really know where the destination is that you're going to. And this is actually on the internal of the site, off the parking lot, garages to these townhomes. And again, some second floor decks looking out into the interior of the site. And that's it for me.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, again, with the public hearing, the first public hearing we're going to have is in regards to changing the zoning. That's going from a B2 Central Business Transition District to a PD Planned Development District. With that, I will declare the public hearing open. Anyone wishing to offer testimony on the potential rezoning is urged to step forward, name and address for the record. Public hearing is still open.
Robert Good, 1000 Union Street. So my understanding of the changing of the zoning district would be that taxes would be different during these 5 buildings that are going up instead of paying.
No,
Then,
zoning has nothing to do with the amount of taxes.
what's the? You had said something. You had said something about the 5 different buildings over the time that this is.
The different phases
Yeah.
of the project?
Yes,
So, yeah, the project is gonna be built in phases,
correct.
one building at a time.
Sure. I guess I'm just having a hard time understanding why this needs to happen.
The rezoning?
Yes.
So, Director, do you want to speak to the rezoning request?
Sure. So the rezoning for the planned development district, again, allows the city to work with the developer to provide flexibility within the design in order to get a better development out of the package. As opposed to taking each individual building on a case-by-case basis, it allows us to look at a larger area to have a more complete package with this. Now, with the planned development district, it allows, like I said, for some deviations within there, and the deviations that are being requested are relatively minor, and let me pull them up real quick.
Thank you.
Yep, so
Gonna
the
be the
deviations, right, so the deviations that we're looking at with this are really kind of 4 of them. 2 of them are on the east side, 2 of them are on the west side of the site. The east side of the site are really just the setback from the drive aisle parking area to the adjacent property. Typically, we require a 5-foot setback in between there. This one has a 3.5-foot setback in between these. It allows them to get an additional row of parking to be adjacent to that. In between this, it's another parking lot. This parking lot is pretty close to the setback. I don't believe this one meets it on the Guzman building. With these 2 deviations here, because of the way this property line, it goes at an angle right on the corner, ever so slightly here. So it'll bump into that area very, very slightly. It would require a 5-foot street yard setback. It probably would put it down to a 3. And then on the corner here as well, another 3-foot setback instead of the 5. These townhomes would be pushed back a little bit further to give you the 5-foot setback. So those are really the deviations that they're requesting. I think if things would happen in the future that would have to be brought back, again, having this zoning also provides additional protections where if certain things change and they require additional deviations that are significant, those have to come back and reviewed by the Plan Commission and Common Council. Versus if this was just a standard zoning, they met the zoning, they move forward, there's no further review by this body. So these are the 4 deviations that they're requesting relating to the site that is proposed tonight.
Okay, that clarifies. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Yes, sir. And while we're coming up, I did get an email from James Guzman, who owns the property at 1100 Centerpoint Drive. It's rather lengthy, 2 full pages on small print. Summarizing it, he objects to the property for a number of reasons, and those will be made as part of the record if anybody wants to go through and read all of the reasons. He lists several of them on several pages. But that is part of the public record, and we will make sure that that is in there. Again, Mr. Guzman, owner of the property at 1100 Centerpoint, is objecting to the proposed site.
Frank Gela, 527 Granite Ridge Road, Stevens Point. My property is on 925 2nd Street, which would be, I guess, about a half a block away. My greatest concern and question is, I don't know if it's a zoning issue or not, but would be parking. Are we going to have on-site parking to substantiate all these apartments? Or are we going to use
There is
additional space
on-site
off of
parking, yeah.
Portage?
It's not relevant to the zoning change, but yes, there is.
Yeah, I mean, it's already a tight area the way it is. You know, there's many businesses on that side of town already, so
Thank you.
I want to know when that part comes.
Public hearing is open? Still open?
Good evening, Pam Holesky, 640 4th Avenue. I have some questions. I've been coming to these meetings since we had the little development down by my house on 4th Ave that I'm still not happy about. I have a question. So, where is the
Pam?
developer?
There will be no interaction. This is a
Oh, I'm
public
sorry.
hearing.
Oh, sorry.
Public hearing,
Okay.
we're taking testimony only.
Oh, say, all right.
And again,
Sorry.
this one
Next
relates
item.
directly to the rezoning request.
Is the rezoning request to help a TIF district be
No.
established there? Okay. So this seems like a very big project for, and I guess, so we're rezoning the whole thing for the whole project, or is it?
That outline that you see on the screen, that's the rezoning request.
Even though you're gonna do it in phases?
That's the rezoning request.
Okay, then I'm definitely opposed to it. I think it needs to be further discussed and further looked at, slowed down again.
Is there anything in particular that you want slower?
You know, there seems to be a lot of, again, this development of apartments and multifamily. And, you know, I'm in real estate, and we're dying for single-family housing. You know, just, the whole country is, really. I've been to the national conventions, I've been to the state conventions, everybody's saying the same thing. And here we are adding on to apartments, and that's not what people are wanting, you know? And I guess I'm wondering why you would want to go, and I think a little more retail is fine, but like, rezoning this because it's disconnected from Center Point Drive, I guess is,
For setback changes. That's what the rezoning is for, just as the director just outlined.
I understand that, but the whole concept of they should build it here because the north side is disconnected from Center Point Drive and on First and Second Street, I think those problems should be fixed first, I guess, is my thinking on it. Because if it is disconnected because of Center Point Drive and our lovely one-ways on Second Street and First, maybe that should be fixed first, you know, and it is busy there. It's terribly busy on
Pam,
Second Street, so.
None of that really has anything to do with the rezoning request.
Well, I think it does, so we agree to disagree.
No, we don't.
That's part of the
We're
problem,
looking at
too.
setbacks. Setbacks, and we're not talking about the disconnect or one-way streets. We're looking at the setbacks for the rezoning. Thank you, though. Public hearing is still open?
Carl Wires, 933 Meadow Street. I have a concern about the access on Portage Street into the parking.
Okay.
And if I understand what's been discussed so far, changing the district from B2 to PD actually allows the plan to be developed in a way that suits the whole property.
I guess I would say that it's probably more relevant to the conditional use request.
Okay.
But because this one kind of does play into it, the changing an access point would change setbacks. So I think that you could
Okay.
talk about this.
My concern is that because I live at the corner of Portage and Meadow, that having a lot of that parking accessed from Portage Street is going to create an issue for my use of Portage Street and how I drive it. And can the developers figure out a way to have that access happen off of Third, closer to Center Point, so that some of that traffic stays off of Portage Street?
Okay.
That's what I wanted to bring up, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not.
Not exactly related to the zoning change, but
I think the PD zone actually
Close enough.
allows that to be discussed at a future point
Yeah.
without slowing down the progress of the project.
I think so. Okay, thank you. Public hearing is still open?
Rachel Siebers, 933 3rd Street, Stevens Point. So my property is adjacent to this, and in regards to the setback, and specifically for building one, one of the architects or somebody associated, Joy, reached out to me to hopefully conduct a shadow study, because the setback with that 3-story building could impact the shadow and the sun on my property. And so I'm concerned that with restricting the setback at 3 feet, that property is therefore even closer to mine, therefore impacting that shadow. So that's specific just to the building one, so just that one setback on the corner of Third and Portage.
Great, thank you. Public hearing is still open? Public hearing is still open. And for the last time, the public hearing remains open. Okay. Seeing no one else wishing to speak, I will declare the public hearing closed and bring it back to the commission for discussion and some sort of action on the request for the rezoning. Commissioners?
Michael, can you just clarify on if these are the 4 deviations they're asking for now, and then if there are larger discussions that would come back to the Plan Commission?
Right.
Beyond these 4 deviations.
Correct. So again, just to kind of go over it, because this can get kind of confusing in terms of process when you have separate action items for the same project. So the zoning itself has nothing to do with the TIF district or whether financial incentives are involved or anything regarding to that, and that's not the purview right now of the Plan Commission. The zoning is relating to the use of the property, the setbacks on site, the density of the property, that sort of thing. The thing with a planned development district, it allows really to set your own kind of zoning standards within that district so you get a better development with it. So really, the standards that we're looking at within this district, as I mentioned before, there were the 4 deviations that were sought, one being, let me go back to those, so we can talk about them. One being on the north end of this entry point off of Union Street, the second being on the southern end. They need to reduce that setback area in order to get a proper drive aisle in there at 24 feet and 18 foot for the stalls in order to get proper parking and parking so that people can back out without having significant issues. This area right here on the corner, because of the way that jogs, it just makes for an odd situation if you're continuing to push that building back. A lot of times where you'd see in the downtown zoning district, which would be just to the south of this across Center Point, you'd have a 0-foot setback. So you'd have that property or that building right up against the property line. Because this was more of a transitional area, they wanted to have a little bit more of a setback separation with the 5 feet, and that's where it calls for within our zoning code. And again, this small deviation up here where Ms. Siebers kind of had mentioned with the shadowing and the setback, this would be kind of a reduction in potentially up to 2 feet on the northern edge.
Are both of those driveways ingress and egress, meaning they're going to be two-way?
And they are.
Okay.
Correct. So
that might answer
Yep.
one gentleman's
Yep,
question.
so
That
the
there
ingress,
ultimately
egress-
are 2 driveways then.
So the ingress and
Not all on
egress
Portage Street.
on the property would occur in 2 locations. One along Union Street, and then one along Portage Street, with no access along Centerpoint Drive, and no access along the 3rd Street corridor. And the way that the site is laid out with the pedestrian connection, as Mr. Drendel had expressed in the presentation relating to this, keeping this pedestrian plaza connecting back up to Meadow, because Meadow essentially dead ends into the site. When we were looking at the mall redevelopment project, there was thoughts about punching Meadow Street through and connecting back up to Strong's, but the distance between Union Street then and Meadow or Strong's would get very, very tight and cause problems. I think they've done a very good job with making that connection, but having it be a pedestrian connection through there. Keeping in mind, really, if this was a permitted use and not requiring any deviations like this, there would be a lot, I guess, higher intensity uses that could go on this site than multifamily. You know, quite honestly, you could have a Walmart supercenter being built on this site that would generate tons more traffic out of this site, and this Plan Commission would have no review of that. So I think, you know, some of the comments relating to that and the shadowing and those concerns are very relevant to this, as well as some of the ingress-egress points. But keeping in mind that I think the way they've laid out the site to provide that pedestrian connection, a majority of the traffic will likely come through Union as they're heading down Center Point. They're going to turn, take that first right into the site versus going past Center Point, heading down 3rd, coming back Portage and up. You know, I know there was some concerns and kind of how this driveway kind of lays out and has the intersection with the driveway across the street on Portage Street, and I've got a slide to kind of show kind of where that comes into play. I really think a lot of you know, you might have some of the morning traffic heading out of this driveway on Portage, but I think most of the evening hour traffic with lights, that's going to be heading in on the Union Street side, just coming back into the site.
And that's important to note too, because one of the other speakers had talked about things that were irrelevant to the rezoning. As the director said, You could put up a super center there, and there's nothing that we have as far as oversight. That is allowed in the specific zoning districts. And that's the same for our next item when we're talking about the conditional use. It can be businesses. If the exact same project was done with office space, it would be completely allowed and okay, and there would be no oversight. The next item is specifically because of that family residential living, that multi-family residential component. That's it. It would be allowed at the same levels that it is now if it were a different use. And that's why we need to stay focused on the topics at hand, in this case specifically the zoning. If it wasn't for those 4 particular items, we probably wouldn't need to do anything. We could do each building as it came across, and they would be considered separately. But the zoning change will allow these 4 things to happen. That's it. That's all we're talking about tonight.
So I just wanted to maybe, because some of this came up at the last meeting that we had here in January with the conceptual project review. We had some concerns about height of the building and how maybe it's inconsistent with that of the downtown and the area in general. This is just a quick height map of some of the multi-story buildings. Here's the proposed development on the former Lullaby site. Cobblestone being across the street with 4 stories, Pioneer Park
Director,
Place.
I'm going to cut you off there because we're really only talking about the zoning right now.
Zoning includes a site plan, though.
Okay,
So that's why.
we'll let that go.
Yeah. So,
It's all really part of the same thing anyway.
so the Pioneer Park Place at 3 stories, High Street Manor, or High Rise Manor at 7 stories, and how they abut residential. This site would be 4 up front, and then stepping back to the 3 and the 2 stories as you get to the townhomes. And we'll talk about parking kind of with the next one. But one of the other our questions came regarding impervious surface in the site plan, in that it looked like it was a lot of buildings, a lot of asphalt parking, and that there wasn't a lot of green space and impervious surface. Just doing a very kind of preliminary look at, our core area and how much impervious surface this core area has in our downtown, which is typically more of our denser areas. We've got about a 5% impervious surface coverage in this area, largely because there's some larger green spaces in here. The development in hand has a 30% impervious coverage, so more than 6 times the amount that of our downtown area. Pervious. But with the rezoning request, I feel that the deviations are appropriate. I think it makes for a better site connection between the downtown and the residential neighborhood to the north. I think they've done a very good job with stepping down to the buildings and making that connection and having a diversity on the site. So we'd recommend approval with the conditions outlined in the staff report.
Okay, Commissioner Haynes?
One little question, hopefully. So as a PD, in, let's say, 2 years, as the next phases come to fruition.
Commissioner, for everybody else.
I know, I just want to
When you
know-
say PD, you mean plan development.
Right, sorry.
Thanks. I
Plan
just want to make it clear.
development. What would kick back to the plan commission to review something? If they
Nothing.
wanted to change
If they wanted to
anything?
change something.
Right.
A significant change would occur on site, that would come back to the plan commission.
Okay,
But
so
if-
building 1, if they for some reason changed
all of a
its
sudden.
placement
Its
a
placement,
little-
encroached further into setback area significantly, that would come back to the planning commission and council for further review.
Okay.
But after the approvals tonight from a planning perspective, if that's the way it goes, that would be it for planning, because what you're doing is you're approving the rezoning, the site plan that goes along with the rezoning, as well as the conditional use permit to operate the multifamily.
Does that answer your question? Cool. Okay, commissioners? Commissioner
So
Rice?
the only deviation highlighted that I maybe would have some concern with would be that on the corner of Third and Portage, I think you mentioned, Michael, that the townhomes are set back 5 feet, but building 1 is only like 3.5. Is there any reason for that in particular? I see there's like 56 feet of space between building 2 and building 1, so there may be space to move the building, which would probably be easier before it's built.
Yeah, typically it is.
Yeah, my concern, just, I guess, would it be about traffic visibility at that stop sign at, on Third Street at the intersection of Portage? If there's any reason that it's currently encroaching on that setback and kind of the significance of burden to
Shift that building a little
yeah.
bit further to the south, about 2 feet. So I think that could be accomplished to shift it a little bit further to the south. It would encroach into this green kind of walkway area.
Right.
But it's really only 2 feet.
Right.
Okay. Commissioner Arnson?
It was pointed out to me by somebody that the vision for turning on Union Street, there are a couple big buildings there, certainly that one on the northeast corner of Union, and it kind of impedes looking. You gotta kind of creep out there to see what the traffic's coming. And I'm wondering if that might be exacerbated by the additional traffic coming out of there. And if you got higher flows of traffic, has that been looked at or considered?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what building are you
Yeah, I'm not.
commenting?
The Peace Hole building, I believe it is, that
Okay.
big
Yeah.
blue one that, across the street
Straight.
from the Guzman building.
Yep, off of Center Point.
Okay.
And you do gotta kind of creep out there a little bit to see the traffic that's coming.
So I think, as we look at that, in the traffic along Center Point and any of the improvements that can be made along Center Point, right now it's a, three-way or three-lane raceway around downtown. I think as we look as a city to make further improvements of that area, to provide some traffic calming measures, whether that's parking on the street, which significantly slows traffic, looking at doing, when you have this mid-block crossing here along Center Point, possibly doing a raised table, which will act as kind of a speed bump, which will also slow traffic. But I think as you start to constrict that roadway, it reduces the speed of traffic, and it also, as you look at some of these bump outs, here's just a quick, let's see if I can find here, this right here. So this would just an exercise that we looked at doing, if we did parallel parking along Center Point and brought it all the way back to Smith Street, you can come out with these bump outs, which would help control that, would allow, pedestrians to cross safer, which would allow additional space for you to creep out before you're into the lane of traffic. So there are certain improvements that we could look at doing to address any of those concerns that may be had with any development that would occur on that site.
All right, good, thanks.
Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, I'd be looking for a motion.
I would move approval with staff recommendations and the PD plan with the 4 deviations as
Okay.
recommended.
Seconded by Alderperson Kneebone. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And the rezoning request is approved. Item number 6 is a public hearing and subsequent action on a request from Slingshot Architecture for a conditional use permit to construct apartments in multiple buildings at 1017 3rd Street. Director, do you want to add anything before we open that up?
No.
Okay, again, if this wasn't multifamily, we would very likely not have anything to consider. But because there's a multifamily facet to it, all zones have multifamily as a conditional use, so we have to consider the conditional use. So at this point, we'll be talking about the multifamily portion for the conditional use. And with that, I'll declare the public hearing open. Anyone wishing to offer testimony on that portion can step forward, name and address for the record.
Rachel Siebers, still living in 933 3rd. I would specifically like to address, again, Building 1 on the property in regards to the multi-use. So with this, a big thing that was discussed in the findings was that as you move to the neighborhood to the north, that you were trying to transition to that single-family neighborhood with the townhouses, excuse me.
Okay.
And with this building butting right up against 2 of those houses, being 933 my own and then 950 Portage, I feel like that's not taking into consideration that transition. if I had the best suggestion, it would be taking that multi-use property, building one, and actually taking that and turning it into townhouses. Because again, that is helping that transition from commercial use to residential use on that corner, so.
Thank you. Ryan actually gave me a call earlier today, too. I finally got back to him. Yes, he is. And we're going to pass that stuff along, his ideas, so that's good. Public hearing is still open. Public hearing remains open, sure.
Carl Wire is still at 933 Meadow Street. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but the other concern that just came back into my head, because my brain isn't as flexible as it used to be. At the corner of Portage and Meadow Street, there are 6 storm sewers.
Okay.
I think that's significant because at the underpass at Michigan, there are only 8. And we know what happens under Michigan. So my concern in...
We don't own those pumps. I just want to be clear. We don't own those. Those aren't city pumps under Michigan. The flooding that happens there,
My concern is that there are times when those storm sewers cannot handle the volume of water that is coming at them, and then it wants to move on to the property that is proposed for the development. In the flood of 2017, June, that was a whole big lake there for a couple of hours.
yeah.
And I just want to raise that as a concern. I haven't got a clue what to do or say about it.
And just a little off topic, I suppose, that flooding event was significant and rare. We had problems all over the place with that. So the storm sewers are designed to handle, and our director's not here, but I believe it's 100-year events. That was like a 500-year event, so much more significant. We will never be able to cover all of the storm sewers for all our needs. It just won't happen, but we'll do the best we can in that regard. Public hearing is still open. Public hearing remains open. And for the last time, the public... I'm going to start calling you Trevor.
Nature Gela, 610 Coventry Drive, Plover. I own property 909 2nd Street in Stevens Point. I guess I caught wind of this project in the newspaper, and they're talking about multifamily housing. I really, honestly, have had good tenancy and bad tenancy over the life of my ownership of a building. Is there any statistics that you can provide as to the tenancy that you expect over the duration? So that, I think that's kind of how blight happens. If the rents and rents for retails and the rents for the real estate development there aren't met, what happens, and what assurances can we have on that property as far as multifamily goes? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Public hearing remains open.
Kathy Dugan, Alder for District 8. I just wanted to make a couple comments. One is I'm a little concerned with the square footage of the apartments, and because I'm someone who transitioned recently from a home, a good-sized home, to an apartment. I'm not sure I could transition into 600 square feet, or 700 even, or 900. And then I also wondered about the square footage of the townhomes. And I want to comment on the green infrastructure and the pervious pavement and other areas. I'm just delighted with that. I think that'll be a great, great asset to the city. And if the developers can do anything to create even more green infrastructure, I think that would be wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. Public hearing remains open. Anyone in the overflow room wishing to speak? Now's the time. They can hear me, but we can't hear them. I hope they're listening, paying attention. So the public hearing remains open. That's Trevor, by the way.
Thanks, Mike. Trevor Rourke, 601 Washington. In reviewing the conceptual design for the conditional use, I think the flow of people through the commercial courtyard and the surrounding streets and structures are really well thought out. It's evident that this proposal also does a good job of transitioning from the commercial corridors to the residential, as had been pointed out before. And also the less intense areas even north of that in the city. The setbacks allow a better use, more dense land use, which is great. And the building to, the street to building height ratio is better for a downtown type of corridor. Rarely does a development actually consider pedestrian and bicycle, accommodations first, and this place does that. It would enhance the downtown for people that walk, bike, and take the bus, which is excellent. Based on an Urban Land Institute 2015 study and a National Association Realtors 2015 Community Preference Survey, the majority of Americans want to walk places and spend less time driving. Because of this, more and more Americans are preferring to either live without a car, I know it's kind of hard to imagine, but it happens and happens everywhere across the world, and spend less time driving. So because of that, there is actually a market, even if we don't totally fully understand it yet, for people that want to live in the downtown and not necessarily own a car, or maybe they do and just drive it less. This new development has the potential to change the function and our view of this space. Further, the implications to Centerpoint's streetscape character would increase the safety, increase access, livability, and changes are long overdue, I think. Even though the incremental development is more resilient in the long term, I think this project has a lot of potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Public hearing remains open. Public hearing is still open. Okay, come on up.
Andrea Olson, 410 Franklin Street. I also have some of the same concerns about the 106 new apartments going in there. We have 300 to 400 people going out of downtown with Century moving. We're going to have that big open space. They haven't said what they're doing with that, but if that ended up
It's going to be
being-
occupied.
Okay, if it ended up being condos or something like that,
No.
then we, okay.
Century's
Good.
keeping it.
Good, that's good. But then we also have apartments that were just approved on Water Street, I think, so we're going to have more complexes being put up there. We have other proposals for more apartments. People wanted to build apartments over by Kmart, and so when we're trying, and then the city, it seems like, is trying to transition all the two families to one, or to single family. And in 20 to 30-year-olds, you move to a town like this typically, and then you start having kids, and you move to single family. With the 600 square foot house, or not house, but studio apartment or one bedroom apartment, you're targeting a certain population, but do we have that population here to support that? We're trying to keep the college students when they graduate, but when you can get a house with a mortgage for $500 a month, and a studio apartment might be $800 to $1,200, what do you really do? So having this many apartments, it's good that it's incremental, but having all of that happen right there without the businesses right now to support that, it could create blight, like other people said. I'm glad something is going to get built there. We need something there. It would be great, but this is a lot when you could be putting other types of larger spaces there for families actually to stay in and then use the parks, like your single-family homes.
Okay, thank you. Public hearing is still open.
Robert Good, still at 1000 Union. Seems like property values are going up by the minute. I would share some of the same concerns with what other people have said, a lot with what Andrea has said. Just that if this is going in and we are adding all of these units, it kind of doesn't make sense that we're adding this on a block where there are vacant office units already. I own the only duplex, and it's been rented for the last 8 years. Haven't had any issues with that. Rent will continue to rise as competing rents continue to rise. Like that's why I bought this property. I've played Monopoly a lot. I really like Monopoly. Ultimately, it just, like, it doesn't make sense that we're trying to park a Suburban into an eco spot. We're trying to squeeze this big project in and casting shadows on Rachel's house, that we're fighting over 2 feet on street space so that this big thing that might not work out can just go in there. This is a really nice opportunity to do something for the city, to have a lot more spaces for businesses, for people to try things out, without having to pay $300,000 to rehab an old building that is downtown and then still hope that it works out. It's hard to start a business here. It's hard to buy a house. It's hard to do all of those things. So being able to rent does create a much lower barrier to entry. So something like this does create a lot of opportunity for our residents now and our future residents. But we're also we're trying to cram this into half the block, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. We're competing with other individuals on the block. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I just think that a project of this scale, and it's out there that, Belkey is going to be being developed, that all these other things are happening in the city. If we're doing all of this stuff, we should be looking at it at a much bigger scale than just this little thing, just this 2-foot encroachment here, just this little corner here. That's just my opinion.
Great, thank you. Public hearing is still open. The public hearing is still open. And for the last time, the public hearing remains open. Okay, with that, no one else wishing to speak, I'll declare the public hearing closed and bring it back to the commissioners. Commissioners, before we do anything, I want to take a few minutes just to talk about a few things. It's been said that we're doing this project and that project and this project, but we are looking at a much bigger picture. The housing that has been approved and is up for consideration are very different. Just like you and I live in different houses in different areas of town for different reasons. We drive different vehicles for different reasons. What might work for you might not work for someone else. And 600 square feet might work. I've got a niece and nephew that I can't convince them to buy a house, but they insist on paying $1,000 a month in rent. They want to do that because they don't want to shovel sidewalks or fix plumbing or cut the grass. They want to call somebody and have it done. That's what they want. It's not for me. I wouldn't agree with that. I'm trying to convince them otherwise, but people do like that. And the housing projects that we have, we've got one that's a mixed-use family. We've got one that's going to be lower income or fixed income senior housing. We've got this one, we've got the student housing project. And then later tonight, we're going to have a potential project for the Belkey site that, again, is very different than this type of housing. Bringing people into the area is going to create an environment to foster business. I get comments about, well, we should put up a Costco there, or a CVS, or an Olive Garden. The fact is that we don't have enough people to support that in the downtown area. The developers have told us that. So in the bigger picture, what we're trying to do here is get people in the area, creating that customer base, and then someone's going to say, look, we've got 1,000 people living downtown. I want to put up a grocery store or a restaurant or whatever else it happens to be. Having the people there are going to be able to foster that business, incentivize those business owners to come. But to say that we're just flooding the market with random housing isn't exactly accurate. We are strategically creating housing that's been asked for. And again, it might not work for you and it might not work for me, but for someone it's going to work. And a developer wouldn't stick a lot of money into doing something if they didn't have a relatively high level of confidence that this was going to work. They have their own business plans, and they're coming to us and asking for our approval. Will the 2 or 3 feet make a difference? Maybe, maybe not. But that's what they're asking for, and that's what it's up to you to decide. So in this case, we're looking for a conditional use for multiple apartments at 1017 3rd Street. And that's up for your consideration. Thank you for indulging me. What are your wishes?
I'd like to move approval.
Oh, that's all right.
So, thank you. Moved by Commissioner Haynes.
I'll
Is
second
that a second
that.
by Alderperson Nebone? Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that is approved. Number 7, also related to this project, is a request from the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Stevens Point for the sale and/or transfer of 1017 3rd Street at the parcel identified. It's before you because by statute, the Plan Commission must make a recommendation on the acquisition or disposition of any public property. So we're looking at you for a recommendation to do this or not do this. Did I cover that one pretty well, Director?
Any financial implications in terms of the sale of the property would be handled by the redevelopment authority.
Right. Questions? Comments from the audience? Mr. Gela, come on up.
Sure, I'm gonna ask a question because I'm not that bright.
That's okay, me either.
So the city is gonna sell this property to this, is that what we're saying right now?
Transfer it in one
Okay.
form or another. The
Okay,
developer's
and
agreement
is
was.
there any discussions on what the price of that property is worth, or what they're paying for it?
We've talked about that, but that's not available to the public yet. We're only looking at
So
whether
we're
or
gonna
not.
allow them to do it, and then we're gonna tell how much we're selling it for?
No.
Oh.
We're looking for a recommendation on whether or not this is a good idea to do.
Okay, so my
Now, the
point is,
council
in this
then, or the
recommendation,
redevelopment
you-
authority, the redevelopment authority will have a meeting at some point in the future to determine how that transaction occurs.
is that the cart before the horse?
Not necessarily. It's a whether or not we buy a cart or a horse.
I mean, you know how much my property's worth, but you don't know how much this property's worth.
We do know how much this property's worth.
Okay, I'll wait for that day then.
Yep, that says an assessment on it, just like any other property. Any other comments? Okay, commissioners, what are your wishes?
I move approval of the redevelopment authority's request as presented.
Thank you. Second, seconded by Commissioner Arnson. Any further comments? Hearing nothing there, we will go to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 8 is another public hearing and subsequent action on a request from Wanta Properties LLC for a conditional use permit to construct apartments on the property bounded by Centerpoint Drive, 3rd Street, 2nd Street, and Portage Street with the following addresses: 1013 2nd Street, 941 Portage, 1000 3rd, 1016 3rd, 1105 2nd, 916 Centerpoint, and an unaddressed parcel, 3 unaddressed parcels as identified in the agenda item. Director, if you have anything to add, otherwise I want to have the developer come up here and talk about their project.
No, after the developer goes through, we
Okay.
can,
Maybe
our recommendation.
a representative from Wanta Properties? Ryan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Wanta.
One quick second before you start, because we do have some vacancies now. I see people are leaving. If there's anyone in the overflow room that would like seats, we've got at least 4. You can come into this room. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
Don't worry, they gave me a moment to figure out how to work this. Hi, I'm Ryan Wanta. I'm representing a family business, Wanta Properties. We also own Wanta and Son Construction. It's a family-owned business out here in the area. We are located in Bevent, Wisconsin, which is not far. I have a lot of ties to this community, and this was something that I've been working on for a while. I had an idea that grew very slowly, and there was opportunity when I moved back here after living many different cities to actually see this through. A little background on what we're trying to do here. Now, what we're trying to do here is something a little new and unique for a modern construction or a modern concept. It's live-work development. And what we're looking at, and it's a very old concept as well. It's kind of what founded this city, which is, essentially a shop or a store or any kind of business where the owner themselves live in the same space above it. And I have experience living in one of these. When I lived in Los Angeles, I lived in a building that was live work, and it was a couple units, many different sizes, many different businesses were there, and I was running and operating a fashion line out of it. And it was really helpful in us getting our line off the ground because we were able to not only have a attractive space to welcome our clients, but we're able to save some bucks by condensing all of our expenses under one roof and write 50% of it off for our taxes, which is great. And and for a small business, any little bit of money really goes a long way, especially when it comes to hiring new people, developing new products, growing your company. So the idea here is following International Building Code. I have some little highlights here. Now, these are just illustrations of what live work rentals typically can look like. These aren't exactly representations of what will be done in this development. A lot of that is built to suit, but you'll see that it combines mostly workspaces on the ground floor with living spaces above. That is the general kind of configuration you work with. The building code limits each space to 3,000 square feet. And the non-residential area is permitted to be a maximum of 50% of that space because of taxes, but no less than 10%. Non-residential area is limited to the first or main floor only. Maximum occupancy of these units is 5 non-residential workers. So you can have 5 people that aren't living there with you that can be your employees at the same time. And you could have more employees, but you just can't have more than 5 of them. Not only this, there's a required handicap accessible ground floor in all these units. And that is pretty much standard when you're developing any kind of residential combined with commercial development. Even if it's just, if they're separate units, you at least have to have your ground floor and whatever floor above that accessible to be handicap. So here are a couple of images of like what was inspiring me, the kind of space that I lived and worked in. It was a raw industrial space, often concrete floors. Sometimes the mezzanines would be wood, but really as customizable, open, modern, bright, fun spaces. What I really wanted to focus on in creating was kind of a blank slate for any business that really wants to kind of do their own thing and not really kind of force them in one direction or the other. So here are just some examples of that. You'll see a lot of them feature lofts upstairs, you know, with open air sort of concept, which I really find attractive. Now, some of these units can have that, some of them won't, some of them can be totally shut off from the upstairs. I really wanted to feature a lot of natural light. As a designer and an artist, I think it's really important, so I have some northern light pouring in from the back side of the building, really even light, and big storefront windows on the south side, a lot of glass. My exterior tastes in architecture and design is a little bit modern, but I do like mixing old with new. And I'm really looking for something that is, you know, a little bit more modern in this area. You know, I think there is a beauty that we have and we can capture in this town with our beautiful brick buildings, mix it with other sort of textures and architectural styles. I also like the idea of incorporating, you know, trellising and all sorts of fun stuff on that. Here are some other inspirational images for this project. Now, this is all born out of this idea that I want to say it was well over a year ago I came to you guys looking at the Lullaby site, but you know, our priorities have changed and going over things. I still want to incorporate native plantings. I really want to be sensitive to what we do. What we're planning is sort of using the footprint that's already there, and it's that parking lot. I know that people got used to using that parking lot, so we'd maintain that, and around that we'd keep all the trees that are on the property, and we'd fill in with native plants and all that kind of stuff. there's a tiny little image that I did not know would show up this small in this presentation, but I wanted to show that I wanted to design this property with the sense of responsibility. And I'm utilizing passive solar design in the design of it. The south side will, it has a full front of windows, and you'll see that. But in the summer, when the sun is high, there's enough shading in there to protect sunlight from actually getting inside the building. So you have a natural glow of light helping to reduce your cooling costs. And in the summer, when the sun is low, you have full penetration of light into the structure. And with having the building being a large amount of thermal mass to it, there's block walls separating it, concrete floors, concrete mezzanines with the sun shining inside of it that can really hold some of that heat and release it at night. So this is my fancy version of the development site and the zone maps surrounding it. It's right in that transition zone between, we still have a little bit more of commercial just to the north of it, and to the west of it, we now have something proposed going in that is a mix of both as well. And we have a lot of the downtown area. We talked tonight a couple times about that transition. And I thought it was really important to have a building that was welcoming from the downtown area, and that didn't actually have a really large density to it, and it didn't have a large height or obstruction of the view. This is only just over 2 stories tall in the back, and I think that we maintain a lot of open space around it. So here is our site plan, which I have no way, okay. It's a little zoomed in, thank you. Here is, pretty much this is the current footprint of what the parking lot is, but it's been redesigned a little bit in consideration with having access right here across the street, to protect. I wanted to maintain the areas here to either side of the building for possibly the end units that are capping it to have, if they have a restaurant space or something that needed an outdoor space, we would have an area that we can provide that. I'm thinking having gorgeous plantings here and there on the sides of the buildings. We're going to maintain all the trees that we have along the street. And to incorporate an alley in the back so that we have access for deliveries, a place for our trash to be collected. Also, each unit will come with parking, a 2-car covered garage, because that's important in Wisconsin, and then behind that, an approach that would fit 2 cars as well. So you could fit 4 cars for each unit.
Ryan, sorry, people in the other room can't hear you because you're walking away from the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So if you could, just try and stay there and direct from there, please.
It's not the first time I'm told I need to calm down. Okay, just to recap, I guess I walked away when I started talking about the site map. The parking lot is using pretty much the existing footprint of what is there currently. The plan is to keep the trees that are already planted there. I mean, they're large, why bother disturbing them? And to have enough space to either side of the unit to have not only lovely landscaping, but to have some spaces for outdoor seating or something of that nature if that works out for the tenants that we select for either end of the building. Also in the back of it, we have an alley that will go across the block, and that would be used for access for deliveries, for trash, for parking for the units. Each unit will have a 2-car garage behind and some storage, and then an approach behind that would also fit 2 cars, so essentially 4 cars. And our utilities and all of our services would be accessed from the back as well. Okay. And here's what she kind of looks like. Oh, okay.
He's messing with your Zoom.
It's a little, ooh. Okay, this is it kind of looking at a Google Earth shot of what's there currently, where it would be placed. So people have an idea of how it will be situated with everything else in the area. It's situated on the south side, you'll see, of that lot. Here's it from the other side. And those trees are approximately where the current trees are. And right now I'm just showing like stand-ins on the end for, you know, what possible businesses could look like. Each of those units that you see with walls, they're units that you can, you know, because each business, each kind of live-work situation is different. You can have architects, you can have lawyers, you can have people who offer real estate services, yoga studios, all types of small businesses. But each one has, you know, their own specific need for access to the public or privacy by appointment only. So I wanted to be able to create something that says, no, don't come in right now, or like, yeah, we're open for business. So my concept was to have these sort of folding walls for the units that were, you know, metal and wood, and you know, when you're closed for business and you're living in your space, you can have a sense of privacy, or even privacy for your customers. You can create an outdoor space for your own use. And I thought that was really important. I also want to note that I have, you know, one solid slope facing the south, because one of our goals, you know, we're trying to really make this all work for us, because we're not, you know, a super huge company. And we really want to have this building be relevant and worth something in the future. So I'm really wanting to pursue, and why I really want to put solar panels on this like right away. Solar film I was exploring with solar panels or something. So I want to set this up in a way that we have the infrastructure in place for it, so that it won't be expensive to transition to it if we can't do it right now. But I'm really hoping to do it right now. And we'd have an entire wall of, you know, an entire roof of solar, which would be really cool. And I also want to put wall batteries in each unit, which I think is awesome as well. Here's another angle to beauty shops. This is from the southeast. And you see that area, you know, I have a kind of general idea of what it wants to be, but, you know, until you meet, I think, the right tenants and we start those discussions, we can really meet out those spaces. I would plan on using all the walls would be block or masonry and metal, incorporation of metal. I thought the silver would be really cool in this space, not only because it kind of hints at our tradition and our agricultural like history, but it's modern, and it kind of takes on the color of the sky. And mix that with wood. It's a warm and a cool. I really like that combination. And you'll also see that, you know, on the units that don't have the overhangs above it, I have solar shades too, so that is. Look, there's a wine store. Yes, at each unit too, I really like this, would have a really spacious 25 by 25 outdoor space in the back above the garage. And I just think that would be really cool. Here's a night shot. You can kind of see the inside here. But we're going to move on to that in a little bit here. I'm going to need your... So here's a concept for the floor plan, so everybody kind of has an idea what we're proposing. We want to offer, you know, a mix, basically a lot of them on demand, because I don't want to, you know, build stuff and not really have them rent. We have some of them that are going to be like open loft design, The entire second floor would be just open space to do what you want, with all the essentials downstairs, the bathrooms. Here, you're looking at, this is the top one.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yes. The top one is second story, and that's the mezzanine. And you'll see that we have some units that have nothing. We even have some units that I managed to fit 2 bedrooms in. So, you know, to be able to not only, I don't know, have a roommate and share all of your expenses for your business, or family, or, you know, anyone, even if you wanted to have an extra space up there, you know, to really offer that flexibility. And then we have on the downstairs, I have some options for those models too. Some of them are just strictly commercial, where, you know, we have a storeroom, we have a restroom, and we have some utility closets. The other ones that have nothing upstairs, but just downstairs, will have 2 bathrooms. One that is, you know, private, that you could enter not only from the open space, but also from the other bathroom. But the other one would be open for public use. And then, you know, we could have the kitchen upstairs or downstairs. And to utilize, you know, in the garage, of course, we'd have a little bit more room than necessary for 2 cars. So we'd have some storage, some utilities in there. Trench drains, you know, we'd really, the idea of this too is, you know, how it's set forth is that this is all built under commercial code. So you have nothing to worry about that. Here is a really small kind of shot, but it didn't look this way when I had this. Sorry, I apologize for all this. Yeah, that's kind of a view from a upstairs kitchen area to an outdoor space. So you kind of have a concept of what we're aiming to do here. And now I have some other interior shots of what she'd look like. See, he's enjoying his view. And this is what a typical unit would look like on the interior too, as well. You know, the front, if it's open to both. So.
Great. Anything else, Ryan?
Well, I guess I just really want to add, you know, how I think this works in a community like ours, is that I think it's really important for small businesses to have a space like this. And what I think it's also it builds on our downtown, and it's a zero commute, what is it, equation, you know, where your owners, all they have to do to go to work is walk downstairs. And you bring more work, you bring more employees into the area, you have more business here, you have more people visiting all the businesses. I think that this is a compound solution to a lot of our problems that we have, you know, facing our downtown area, especially after going to the housing study and seeing, like, you know, no new apartments have built down in the downtown area in such a long time, and now we have all these vacant spaces, and we have all these, I think there are a lot of parking lots, but there are no places for people to walk to outside of that downtown corridor. And I think this helps tie together all those wonderful shops like MEJ's, and then keeps people walking to the square. So, I don't know.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Director, anything you want to add before I open the public hearing? Okay. So again, this is a public hearing for a conditional use for the construction of apartments. With the zoning, there are certain things that are already allowed. And the commercial portion of this would be allowed. We wouldn't have any oversight. Well, any additional oversight other than what our zoning code allows. So with that, I will declare the public hearing open. Mr. Gela, I know you wanted to make some comments during the presentation, but now would be that time.
When you talked about these 2 stalled garages, is that on Portage Street, or is that on a separate street of itself? Are we taking parking money?
The concept, Mr. Gela, would be that they're on-site, so it's not going to be accessed from a city road.
An alley.
So you're not going to take away, to enter these garages, that long garage that you talked about, is not going to be accessible from Portage. It's a separate driveway? of its
Correct.
own? All right.
Thank you. Public hearing is still open? Sure. Go ahead, Polly. You're closer.
Polly Dalton, 1579 Church Street. I didn't see any depictions of promotional signage, and I'm wondering if that's a consideration for the site plan, especially because there's so many, the proposal for multiple tenants, where signage would go with that, and then also evening lighting, if there are businesses that are active at night, if the sign will be lit in a way that people will be able
So,
to see.
Polly, everything would cover, our current zoning code would cover sign ordinances.
Okay.
This is only a conditional use for the housing
For the
aspect.
housing aspect. Okay, thank you.
But yes, it's already covered under our zoning code. Mary Ann?
Mary Ann Leszewski, 1209 Wisconsin Street. Is it 8 units? 10. If these 10 business owners choose not to live above their property, or if they need a larger accommodation, are those able to be rented out separately? It looks like they have immediate access into
Brian, I'm going to have you answer that after the public hearing. For two reasons. One, public hearing is, that's a legal requirement that we have to do. And two, nobody can hear you back there because you don't have a microphone.
Because we're building on spec that there's 10 business owners who want to live above their businesses in a one-bedroom apartment and some 2 bedrooms. And if that's a really limited option. So if they can't rent out the upper unit, years ago, there were people living above their laundries and their liquor stores and their drugstores, and it was done all the time. But it also could have, these second-story accommodations could also have been rented out separately as units, and so I'm inquiring if that's an option with this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Public hearing is still open? I was looking for the body language, like I'm ready to get up and move and talk.
601 Washington, Trevor Rourke. First, I'm very excited about this. This looks awesome. This is a really cool project. Live work units downtown, I think yes, thumbs up to that. I do wonder, however, if there's a possible modification in site plans, and this is kind of taking 8 and 9 together, because it's very related. Could the development instead get built more a 0 to 10 foot setback to center point? And this would be very similar to the corridor as it's starting to turn out. I mean, it exists now in a Guzman building with Peaceful, Wildcard. Those are all 0 or 5 foot setbacks. If this is possible, the parking lot, in whatever size that works for the developer, could get constructed behind the buildings instead, and it flowed directly into the residential units. Of course, to do this, the city would need to demolish the parking lot and sidewalk abutted to the north side of Center Point, and then move the Moses Creek pipe underneath, so it's not easy, and put it underneath the new sidewalk, right? So my first question is, can this be done? Second would be, how much would this cost the city? The reason I'm actually suggesting this is because reconstructing the parking lot as a city-owned lot, so keeping it municipal, has a 0 tax revenue return over the life of the parking lot. So if we look at another 30 to 60 years of this, I don't know the exact acreage, but eyeballing it on Google Maps, if you were to look at it, compared to MEJ's, which is really close by. MEJ's is about half, roughly half the acreage. MEJ's paid $6,397 in 2018 in tax, property tax. So doubling this would be about $12,794. Thus, extrapolating this throughout the life cycle of the parking lot itself would be anywhere from $384,000 to $768,000 in tax revenue loss. So that's just for the city-owned lot. When I talked to Director Ostrowski about it, he said it might cost $200,000 to reconstruct. I'm guessing we could easily add another $50,000 to $100,000 for its maintenance over the life cycle of the parking lot. So in total, the city's going to lose about $1 million from this parking lot. Okay, that's if it stays municipal, right? So again, I'm supportive of this project. I think it should happen. but can it be moved to the street? So I was reading the comments and statements from the developer, and it seems like it's very much in line with what the Lullaby site is looking at, what downtown corridors want. For example, page 121, urban planners turned away from this last mid-century, thus creating urban sprawl. This was the initial vision, which spawned the original downtown Stevens Point, and I feel, in a way, that returning to the style can aid in its revitalization. This type of development is anti-sprawl because it does not require an increase in services and it alleviates the blight in downtown. Definitely true. I think these are great statements as well, and I agree that this development can alleviate the blight. However, reconstructing the parking lot in front of the building instead of placing it in the back will further create sprawl, as it actually induces demand for people driving to this destination. The developer actually mentioned earlier tonight that there's a lot of parking lots. We have this issue. So obviously, bike parking, sidewalks, et cetera, would be accommodated, no doubt, by the zoning code. But again, much less accommodation than the very visible 66 parking stalls. So it sounds like, to me, the way to meet the developer's goals and long-term vision of this property is creating less sprawl, right? Less commuters and encouraging downtown living through getting the building close to the street and close to that sidewalk. So the unit owners can actually have their outdoor seating, and then it kind of flows right to the sidewalk, kind of like pedestrian plazas at each single unit. Further, when Centerpoint Drive finishes its life in, say, 10 to 15 years, there's an opportunity to reconstruct this corridor. And I have a feeling it's going to look different. It's no longer a highway. It's going to be something, or really a huge concrete moat, as I call it. We have a chance to actually turn it two-way and actually slow down traffic. Again, I really want this development to happen. It is exciting, but I hope you do consider this alternative proposal. And again, I don't have the numbers on how much it would cost to move a pipe and reconstruct and all that stuff, but I do hope staff and developer consider this. Thank you.
Thank you. Public hearing is still open.
Andrea Olson, 410 Franklin Street. So my concern, okay, so anybody that knows me knows that I've been doing live work for 5 years. I could not have started a business, could not have outgrown my basement and overtook the house and then had to move out and have space. And my biggest issue was that this is a conditional use permit to build the apartments. It's great. We have a local family. You know that Brian's dad, he has a legacy that has to continue. So you know you're going to get a good, solid build. However, the conditional use permit within the new zoning, is this addressing the zoning yet? I guess it's conditional use permit to
So
build.
there is no zoning requirement. There's no zoning
So
change.
we aren't addressing.
Only the conditional use.
It's already developmental zoning, correct?
Well, it's not a developmental zoning. What's the zone?
So this acts as a B2. It's a transitional zone, which would allow for these types of uses to be allowed. However, because of the residential nature, there's an extra review by this body and subsequently the Common Council.
There will be no zoning change.
Okay, so this would allow people to then have the employees, like Ryan was saying, working out of the residences. Okay, that was my biggest concern because anybody right now with at-home businesses, even a Lula Row shop, you have anybody pick up, you are in violation of the current building and zoning, so that was my concern, so.
Yeah, for the residential zoning.
Yes, so then this is already zoned all right for everything?
Yep.
Okay.
No zoning changes needed.
Good, that was my only worry for people.
Public hearing is still open. Anyone in the overflow room? Now would be the time to come on up.
Good evening. Melissa Johnson, Alder for District 5. When I had posted the information about this on my Alder Facebook page, a question came up, and I don't have the answer for it, and Mr. Wanta can answer it later, if pets would be allowed. So I promised I would ask, and hence I am here.
Just for the record, pets have nothing to do with the conditional use.
Yes, but it came up, and I said that, and I also said I can't imagine living anywhere without pets, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Public hearing is still open. Again, last call for anyone in the overflow room who'd like to come in.
Hi, Dan O'Mara from the Overflow Room, 1530 Franklin Street. We couldn't hear a lot over there at the children's table, the proposal or whatnot. So does this parcel, when you are combining them together, does it include the old bulky buildings?
Yes.
That would. I would suggest that we amend the conditional use to require that the developer make a good faith effort to use the existing buildings rather than just raising them and getting rid of them. And I believe the good faith effort would be putting an estimate up for renovation versus raising a new construction.
Okay, thank you.
That's all.
Public hearing is still open. Public hearing remains open. And for the last time, the public hearing is still open. Law says I gotta do it 3 times. All right, seeing no one else wishing to speak, I will declare the public hearing closed, and we will bring it back to the commission for discussion. Mr. Wanta, I'd like you to come up. There was at least one question. I forgot what it was, but I saw you writing it down.
Yep.
And then, if you happen to answer the pet question, then we'll look the other way.
Okay. Looking into the law, figuring out about the question about, can you not live there and still rent the upstairs? This is something I'm actually looking into right now. But from what I know and understand is that a proprietor or person of the business has to live in this unit. That's what I understand the law to be in the live-work building code. Also, to answer about the parking lot in the south, I did really look at this because I thought, yeah, that would be a great idea. But, it posed its own challenges, only because of, having your separate private entrances in the back, for your personal use, your garage, your employees, if you wanted to, would conflict with the parking in front and the access of the people going into the business. It would be like, how would we control that without sacrificing the exposure to the south for using passive solar? Now, I thought about, possibly if we rotated the business, we could put the parking lot on the side along the road. Then I sacrificed that southern exposure. I mean, I'm certainly interested in continuing looking and examining this lot because I want it to be the best it can be. But also, another thing that came up too was having the city maintain controlling land that was adjacent to the roads and everything. If they ever decided they needed to redo something or re-examine what was happening in the area, that was all still intact. And that was something that, I thought was important as, cities grow and change to allow that kind of flexibility. Having the private alley in the back of the building, I thought was a nice way to alleviate the pressure of employees taking up parking space for people who need it to come in. And granted, I know I don't want to really encourage more car traffic, but the reality is people use this parking lot too for the tech and other businesses. And that was one consideration. I didn't want to impose or change that as demand or classes. They might plan to add more buildings at one point, and having that ability to them to have that use, I think, was important as being a good neighbor. So, yes, I am open to examining the site plan.
Perfect.
So there's that.
Thank you very much. And
the pet thing, I
if
love
you
pets.
don't want to answer it, you don't have to answer that.
I love pets, but it depends, I guess, on your business. If you're having a restaurant, I don't know what the code is exactly.
Okay.
If you can have a cat walking around in your commercial kitchen. That's all I'm going to say. on that.
Perfect.
But I want pets. I love pets.
Thank you very much. Okay, commissioners. Thoughts, comments?
like a good project to me.
It is very unique.
Unique,
Yeah.
unique.
So just a quick thing, you know, as we've talked about the parking lot and pushing the building up to the street, and yes, we did examine that extensively. You know, if in the motion you would allow for that flexibility, if there's some way that that happens, you know, but the discussions that we've had and the costs associated with moving of that pipe underneath that parking lot, it's an 84-inch storm sewer that for some odd reason,
Bigger than me.
it jets into that parking lot. So right now it comes down Centerpoint Drive, and then it takes an angle into the parking lot, goes down the middle of the parking lot, and comes back out. I don't know for what reason, why that occurred, but that's really the only spot that it comes onto that kind of that private property nature. And to look at redoing that, you're probably in the neighborhood of, you know, a couple $100,000, $300,000 just to move that pipe to the south and reconstruct kind of as is. The larger concern is taking a much broader look at stormwater in general and what that pipe serves. You know, right now, the larger pipe comes around where Moses Creek goes and goes down to the south and below the dam, and that's where we need to get that stormwater to improve the flooding events that occurred recently, you know, all the way up from Fifth and Grant and trying to redirect that. So it's something the utility is looking at, but it's a much, much larger project, and we would hate to reconstruct a pipe, move it down $300,000, come back 3 to 5 years later and say, we're going to rip it all up again. So I think this provides us, yes, there's a cost with the reconstruction of the parking lot, but this provides us right now the greatest flexibility for the foreseeable future. And the other thing that we look at is, how does this intersection play out with a completely reconstructed center point? There may be a property that we'd have to acquire to make improvements to that intersection, and we'd hate to have to take a building away in order to do that. This provides us enough setback where we don't have to do that.
Okay, Commissioner Hoppy.
I guess it's an ordinance question. On our current books, we have a live workspace ordinance. There was discussion about that, about how that
I think
sort of
Mr.
works and how
Wanta
that's.
mentioned that doesn't appear in our ordinances
okay, that's what I was-
specifically like
okay.
that.
So it's
So-
it's allowable, but we look at the use. So it's kind of two uses. You have a commercial use, whatever it may be, a restaurant, an accountant, and most of those are going to be permitted. You know, if it's a brewery or a bar in there, it might require another conditional use. But the residential nature of that, having that living unit in that structure, is what triggers this conditional use. So we look at it like
Understand
two
that.
separate uses, one a commercial use and then one a residential use. And when you have more than two residential uses together, it's multifamily.
Okay, I guess my question wasn't about ordinance, I guess. I guess it's about, the rental. Is that on the owner, that requirement of, that it has to be a live, work,
It would be
rental?
their
Is
option.
that their option?
We
or
would
that?
not,
Okay.
we currently do
That's
not
what-
require that. For
Right,
example,
that's
I
what
see-
I'm-
I see
I guess
Kim
that's
here.
what I'm asking.
Kim has a rental unit above his spot.
Right.
Previous owners, I think, live there, but now it's a rental, I assume. Most of the businesses downtown are owned by someone else, but rent the upstairs.
Correct.
That would be a condition that could be imposed by the owner
Okay,
if they chose to do that, but the city does not require that.
Okay.
So they could have all commercial suites in here and not have any
Yeah.
living units. So that, and a lot of that is, as Ryan was mentioning, the way that you design it and what the building code allows with the certain percentage needing to be live work, that's where it comes into play. But from a zoning
For
perspective.
tax purposes. was
Yeah,
more
from a zoning perspective, we would look at it just as a residential nature
Yeah,
allowing
okay.
that type of
I
use.
got you.
Any other questions, thoughts, or a motion?
Just a thought, I guess. Trevor brought up good points, yeah, about bringing the storefronts to the road. I think it would look nice, but, I mean, there's a lot of other things to consider, obviously, maintaining kind of the current structure of the parking lot. My only concern would be, or thing to keep in mind is, you know, how is this now going to come into play with the adjacent development on the other side of Third Street? You've got I think like a 60-foot building from the road, but it kind of has a natural walkway between Building 2 and Building 1 on the previous development. So as long as there's kind of natural flow of, you know, that pedestrian traffic, I think it makes sense. Maybe not the ideal situation having that parking lot on the road, but just to keep in mind to, do the best with what we've got right now. So yeah, trying to marry that pedestrian walkway across Third Street, make a natural crosswalk. My only other concern would be having that, maintaining that entry to the parking lot so close to the center point intersection. Obviously, that's where it is currently, but again, increased traffic with both new developments, is that going to become a pinch point at all? Again, just comments, things to consider.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I will then move approval of the conditional use with the staff recommendations outlined in their report, also allowing the flexibility for staff to, if they can find a way to move it closer to the street, to be able to do that. That would be my motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Alderperson Kneebone. Discussion there. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 9 is related. That is a request from the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Stevens Point and the City of Stevens Point for the sale and/or transfer of 1013 Second Street, 941 Portage, 1000 3rd Street, 1016 3rd Street, 1105 Second Street, 916 Center Point, and 3 unaddressed parcels. Basically, the property that we're talking about. And again, the Plan Commission's oversight on this is to make a recommendation as to whether or not they should do the transfer. The actual deals and the conditions of the transfer or sale will be done through the Redevelopment Authority, but statute requires that the Plan Commission make a recommendation one way or the other.
I'll move approval.
Thank you. We have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Rice. Discussion, comments from the audience regarding the sale and/or transfer. Andrea, come on up.
Andrea Olson, 410 Franklin Street. My issue is that, or my question is that they're building on spec, so they're doing 10 units in this, but we're selling or discussing the entire property, and when they're building on spec. With building in phases, it's great, but what if somebody else comes in and says, hey, I have $1 million to spend, I want to build, and I need a spot? So suddenly, all the available space
I'll find them
is
a
taken
spot.
right there, though, downtown in that specific area.
Sure.
So suddenly, you have something that's being built on spec that might not get completely developed, and it's going to be sitting there when somebody else might say, hey, I can build something in a year. That would be my biggest concern.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mary Ann?
Mary Ann Leszewski, 1209 Wisconsin Street. I had invited our local historian, Wendell Nelson, to come to speak tonight, and I see he hasn't been able to make it, regarding the history of the Belkey Building. And some of the comments that he shared this afternoon were that the Belkey Building has a strong case to be considered for historic preservation. He observed that the building would never be required to be torn down because of instability, that it is built extremely solid. It is supported by huge, round concrete pourings that are designed to last forever underneath the building. He said I haven't been inside, and he took a tour of it, maybe some of you have, but he said it's a business that's been frozen in time. It's a museum of 20th century woodworking business. The inside is set up as it originally operated, with huge band saws, lengthy leather and metal pulleys, equipment that was used to custom make decades of custom wood products, everything from spindles to the altar for the St. Bronislaus Church. It's amazing that it's all still there and intact. This is also located so close to our original logging and lumber yards along the river, and it makes a great location to document our lumbering and our gateway to the pinery's history. It is so rare for a business to be so intact after so many years, and a great opportunity to preserve something so unique to who we are, both for us, for our visitors, for our posterity. And as a sidelight, it was also Hotel Polska, a Polish hotel during about 1903. There's often been a lot of regret when we've lost historic landmarks. I think this is an opportunity to save a very personal one. It's worth a visit and consideration for preservation before demolishing it, and we could approach the local historical society. They may consider becoming involved in the management of the property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann. And I know that when Mr. Belke was having his sale, someone did go in and take video. That is available, but I got to tell you, almost all the equipment's gone. Mr. Belke sold that off those last couple of weeks. He had a sale every weekend, and basically it's gutted inside. Yeah. It went out. It went to good use. It went to good use. People got to get a piece of history for them. But if you want to see the inside before all those things were gone, I'll see if I can find the videos for you and maybe get you on a DVD or something. Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
Move approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Hoppy. Discussion among the commission? Okay, all those in favor of the request signify by saying, wait, am I doing something wrong? No.
I was just clarifying that it was correct that Haynes made the motion.
Haynes made the motion,
Yes.
seconded by Hoppy.
Seconded by Hoppy or Rice? Hoppy?
Well, I think everybody on that side of the table raised their hand. I gave it to Hoppy.
All right.
Gave it to me.
Because I know Pete raised his hand as well.
I was closest to you.
All right. Again, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 10 is a request from the redevelopment of the authority of the city of Stevens Point to reconstruct a parking lot located at Center Point Drive between 3rd and 2nd Street in the parcels identified. Director.
So it's kind of weird that it's kind of coming from the redevelopment authority. It's a city-run parking lot, but the redevelopment authority now owns the land that it sits on. That's why the request is coming from the redevelopment authority in conjunction with the city.
We're working on cleaning that up, by the way.
So what we'd be looking at is reconstructing that parking lot to a similar design that we would have here, obviously meeting the appropriate planting requirements that would be needed for screening of the parking lot. We wanted to keep a two-way flow. We had looked at different options, possibly with a one-way. It causes concern because you can't come back this way, especially with a one-way drive currently. So keeping it two-way, with the parking in there, about 66 parking spaces. If there was some way to work on moving that parking lot or adjusting it to go behind it to pull that building up, that's definitely something we consider, but, the options and kind of the stuff that we've explored makes it very, very unlikely. So we'd look at reconstructing this parking lot. It would remain a public parking lot, as mentioned, subject to city regulations, whatever they may be in the future, but it would remain a public parking lot that could be used by anyone.
Okay. Comments from the audience?
Wait, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So the little thing in the middle here, is that a walkway or what is it?
That's the intending to be a walkway, kind of, we'd probably adjust that appropriately, maybe centering it in front of the building. One of the requirements within our parking lots, you can't have more than 20 consecutive spaces without having an island. So we run into that problem where you need another island in the middle.
Right.
This might get adjusted, like I said, if, the main entrance is gonna be here for the Wanta building, trying to center that to that focal point.
Okay. Any other commissioner questions? Alderperson Jennings, and then you had a comment as well? No? Okay. All right. I saw movement. I wasn't sure.
Tori Jennings, Alder District 1. I think well over a year ago, I met on site with Director Badoon and Joe to talk about the condition of that parking lot, and because I had been contacted by someone who had had their car broken into repeatedly, and if you stand on that site, it looks like a abandoned area, and so it's dark, it's uninviting, it looks unprotected, but it's a permitted parking lot. And I felt really bad for the people who are buying a permit from the city and parking on this place that just invites vandalism. So I'm actually happy to see it improved. And remarkably, there is a handicap stall like right in the middle. It's like right here.
Yeah.
Whoever did that?
So, I'm not sure how much of the history you know, but there used to be, that used to be the Portesi Pizza lot.
Uh-huh.
and there was a functioning business there. That business has moved out to the industrial
So
park and
never,
become
no one ever took down the sign.
wildly successful. And we tore down the building, I can't even tell you how many years ago. But yeah, there used to be a functioning business on that site.
It'll be a good improvement, so. thank
And
you.
we, when the city acquired it, we didn't do anything to the parking lot. It just stayed there. So. Good. Any other comments? Mr. Moresi?
Vinnie Moresi, District 1, 1008 6th Avenue in Stevens Point.
County Board District 1.
County Board District 1, yes, not Alder. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Just some design considerations. I'm always giving unsolicited advice, and I didn't want to lose the moment and not give it today. So I'm looking at this parking lot, looks fine. The building, excellent design. I love the concept, I love the idea. Something I'd like to see is this median strip here, which you have the sidewalk, it's that little thin blue line. It seems like it'd be a good opportunity to put a small green space there. And the main reason why is that you have basically a story and a half, 2-story building there. And though the design is really great with the overhangs and the sunlight, I think it's good. You still have those bottom windows that are going to get hit by sun regardless, because the overhang's not quite long enough to shade the bottom. So in order, to alleviate that, you could plant some dwarf trees in front, perhaps fruit trees or some kind of ornamental that's native, drought tolerant, because it's going to be a little microclimate there. And also then any storm water coming off, though most of it is, going to go right into the sewer anyway. You have a good impervious space there that could turn into rain gardens or water gardens, which would alleviate a bunch of extra unneeded water going directly into the storm sewer. And I think those 100-year storms are the new normal, and those are happening every 5 years now. So I think we have to honor that and provide for good design. And I won't submit a bill to either of you.
Thank you. I like the idea. I'm not sure about the trees covering the storefronts, but I think we can work within that. So we'll take that into consideration. Any other comments? Okay. Commissioners. Commissioner Cooper.
Move approval of the request as presented.
Thank you. We'll give the second to Commissioner Arnson. Any discussion there? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that is approved. Page 2. Is that like a Paul Harvey thing?
Was, yeah.
Yeah, well, was, yeah. The rest of the story. Item number 11 is a request from the Public Utilities Department to purchase property located within the town of Hull, south of Manowski Court and between Torren Road and Burgundy Lane. Director, did Joel fill you in on this?
So this is, you may ever remember this on a subdivision plat for an extraterritorial review that came before this body, subsequently ended up being denied and then ultimately denied at the council level as well. Since then, we have met with the developer and have tried to work out a design that would be somewhat agreeable to all parties involved. Thought we were getting very close. Unfortunately, county regulations would prohibit that type of design, thus leading to this point of the negotiations and kind of where we're at, looking at potential purchase of this property in order to protect the well 11 and the resource that we have a substantial investment in. We don't want to see another 20-something septics put in this area. We feel that we can preserve this site, leave it in its natural state for the time being until the potential of utilities ever getting to that area where it could develop in a more dense state and not on septic. But right now, what the utility department would be looking at is a recommendation by this plan commission to allow them to potentially acquire this site. Those negotiations in terms of dollar amounts and so forth would again be under the purview of the utility department and authorization by the city.
Okay, any thoughts or comments? Otherwise, I'm going to ask for public comment. Any public comment in this regard? Alder Morrow?
Sean Morrow, I'm the alder for area 11. I think this is a really good idea, really, to try to preserve the water that we have. It's one of the best resources that we also have, as you can tell by the number of fermented drinks that we have brewed in this town. And any more growth and septics and so on would be a really risk for that. I was hoping that perhaps that the town of Hull would have allowed us to put city utilities up there, but they saw not to really want to do that. But I think that we really need to preserve the greatest resource that we have.
Perfect, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none. Commissioners, what are your wishes? Commissioner Arnson.
Make a motion to approve recommending purchasing the property. Is that what we're doing?
Thank you. Is there a second? We'll give the second to Commissioner Rice. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 12, Community Development Department's monthly report for January.
We'll have that for the next meeting. It was kind of a crunch at the end of the month here.
Sure.
So
How about an update?
Quickly, just a couple items. We did hold our targeted area master plans kind of public input session. The first one that we have, we're likely going to hold probably 2 to 3 more. But wildly successful. We held it at Mid-States. We had probably over 120-ish people show up to provide some preliminary comments on the initial thoughts of that. You may recall we're looking at both the downtown and the Division Street corridor for just some master planning efforts. And I think a lot of these developments that we've seen over time, now that they're coming to fruition, will help guide some of those conversations with the planning firm Vanderwall as they continue to develop those efforts. We've got a kind of catch-up call tomorrow, kind of discuss next steps in tabulating some of their preliminary findings, but more information will come out about that as well. And then also working on finalizing some of the stuff with the comp plan and zoning code that should be back at you very shortly. We've had a pretty lengthy conversation with our consultants in terms of the comp plan. We've gotten them the preliminary goals, objectives, and policies that they're now incorporating into the document, so that should be before you fairly soon.
Perfect. Any questions for the director?
I just have a comment.
Okay.
Going along with something you said, Director, I was really pleased to see the amount of people that came out. We don't often see a big room full
Over
of
100.
folks. And even though a lot of the alders were not able to attend because of open meetings laws.
Some say over scrupulous.
Yeah, well, better to err, I guess, on the side of caution. But I just think it's a testimony to the citizens that there's so much interest in going forward. So good for all of you out there.
Absolutely.
And not only came, but I think a majority, probably 95% of them stayed through the entire thing, which was really nice to see.
Yep. Well, and like I keep telling people, this is our community. You take part in the way we go. So, all right, we are out of agenda items. So with that, we are going to adjourn at 8:37. Thank you all.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.